Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're tackling a genuinely fascinating paper by Tennyson Samraj. It's all about the metaphysics of how, and honestly, why, we choose to believe the things we do. The piece is titled Belief Quotient as the Matrix of Doxastic Intelligence. Now I know, that sounds like a mouthful, but it's basically an incredibly deep dive into the human mind, and we're going to unpack exactly what all that means together.
Okay, let's kick things off with a pretty massive question. As artificial intelligence gets smarter, faster, and capable of processing literally mountains of data, what actually separates a human mind from a machine? I mean, sure, an AI can absolutely outcompute us, but the source text argues there's this one specific, profound capability that algorithms just cannot replicate. No way!
And the author argues that the answer is doxastic intelligence, which is, essentially, the intelligence of believing. It's a capacity completely unique to conscious beings that have intentionality and freedom. See, AI can process empirical facts all day long, but it cannot make a conscious, free, and responsible decision about something that's unprovable. It doesn't believe, right? It just computes. We, on the other hand, actually form beliefs.
To help us navigate these deep philosophical waters, here's our roadmap for today. 1. Beyond IQ and EQ. 2. Mandatory versus chosen truths. 3. The 4 existential choices. 4. The belief quotient matrix. And 5. Building a strong BQ. All right, jumping right into section 1, Beyond IQ and EQ. So, human capabilities can be categorized into 3 main areas. We're all super familiar with IQ, right? Our cognitive intelligence. It measures the ratio of our mental age to our chronological age. Basically, our relationship with facts. Then there's EQ, our social intelligence, which measures our competence in interpersonal relationships. But Samraj introduces BQ, our belief quotient. While EQ defines your honest relationship with others, BQ measures your intellectual honesty with yourself. It doesn't give you a numerical score, but rather it qualifies the integrity of your justified belief decisions.
The crucial takeaway the author makes right out of the gate is that knowing how to process information, well, that's really only half the battle. The true mark of the human condition is deciding what to believe about reality. True intelligence goes way beyond just IQ, because at the end of the day, it lies not merely in thinking, but in believing intelligently.
Which brings us to section 2, mandatory versus chosen truths.
Okay, so there are 2 totally different types of truth we need to talk about. First up, empirical truths. These are verifiable, reductive, and mandatory to accept. For example, water is H2O, or if you drop an object, gravity pulls it down. You don't get to choose whether or not you believe in gravity. Acceptance is mandatory. Second, we have existential or metaphysical truths. These are unfalsifiable and entirely volitional. They require our active willpower. We must choose to believe them because the empirical data alone just isn't enough to force our hand.
Just let this thought sink in for a second. Empirical truths must be believed. Existential truths must be chosen to be believed. I love that phrasing. Establishing an empirical truth gives birth to knowledge, sure, but establishing an existential truth, that actually gives birth to a believer. You literally become the author of your own metaphysics.
Moving on to section 3, the 4 existential choices.
Now, the author outlines 4 core phenomenological conjectures, basically the big 4 human questions: the existential self, the facticity of freedom, the essence of God, and moral absolutes. Every single one of us has to impartially confront these 4 areas and make a decision on them. Your stance on these unfalsifiable questions forms the absolute foundation of your belief quotient.
Starting with the concept of the self, the paper calls it a brute fact. There's this beautiful metaphor used in the text, describing the brain as a chrysalis turning neural mass into consciousness. But here's the catch. The individual self is completely undetectable. Like an MRI can tell if a human body is alive, but it cannot detect the self or find your belief quotient. It leaves every physical atom behind it death. Since it's invisible and non-reductive, you can't prove it in a lab, so you have to actively decide to believe in your distinct individuality.
Building on that idea of this self, the text highlights freedom as a non-reductive given. The paper points out that the brain is roughly 65% water, and think about this, you cannot extract freedom or consciousness from a simple glass of water. It's an existential given. The author brings in Jean-Paul Sartre to emphasize that to choose is to be conscious. We're free to choose what we want to be intentional about. You can't just renounce your freedom to decide because, well, even choosing not to choose is still a choice.
Now, when we get to the existence of God, the author takes a rigorously neutral stance, which is super important to point out. Because God's essence is unfalsifiable, it demands a belief decision. Theists choose belief based on things like cosmological origins and the need for a non-contingent being. On the flip side, atheists choose disbelief based on things like the problem of evil or deterministic views of freedom. The absolutely crucial point here is that both atheism and theism are equally valid examples of justified belief decisions. Both sides make a choice based on essence, not because a scientific proof forced them into it.
Finally, for the fourth choice, moral absolutes are portrayed not just as abstract, distant rules, but as highly active decisions. As the text argues, knowing a rule like "thou shalt not kill" really only becomes relevant when a person internally affirms, "I will not kill." Whether it's your personal views on big issues like abortion or monogamy, it's really about discerning right from wrong and using your inherent freedom to take a definitive stance. We're moral creatures specifically because we have the freedom to choose.
That leads us perfectly into Section 4, the Belief Quotient Matrix.
The most important thing to grasp about the BQ matrix is that it's not trying to assign you a numerical math score. It's not grading you against someone else. Instead, it's a structural framework to evaluate the quality of your belief formation through a three-step process. Step 1, G. You address fundamental metaphysical questions, like, does the universe have a beginning? Step 2, I. You entertain and fully comprehend potential answers and phenomenological claims. And step 3, G. You make a justified belief decision for or against those claims. Your belief quotient is simply the result of how honestly you navigate that exact process.
This matrix actually represents a massive shift away from traditional epistemology. While traditional epistemology focuses on justified true belief, things we can actually verify, which gives birth to knowledge, BQ focuses on justified belief decisions. It highlights that highly subjective internal world where you act as the author of your own metaphysics. And it's that specific process that gives birth to believers.
Let's look at our final section. Section 5, Building a Strong BQ. According to the text, possessing a strong BQ doesn't actually mean you're empirically correct about the universe, because remember, we're dealing with unfalsifiable realities here. Rather, a strong BQ means you have the absolute integrity to make a belief decision and then actively define and defend it in your words and your actions. A weak BQ, on the other hand, describes someone who makes a choice but then completely fails to define or defend it. Basically, living an authentic life requires you to step up and own the choices you've made.
Ultimately, developing your doxic intelligence is all about having this deeply sincere internal dialogue between your distinct self and your soul. Being intellectually honest just means being honest with yourself. While EQ asks you to be honest in how you treat others, BQ demands that you are honest when you look in the mirror. When you actually achieve that, you completely eliminate internal hypocrisy and all that exhausting mental dissonance.
So now that you understand the mechanics of these existential choices and how doxastic intelligence is the fundamental thing separating the human mind from artificial intelligence, the only thing left to ask is, what is your belief quotient? Have you truly examined the phenomenological conjectures in your own life? And more importantly, are you ready to define and defend them? Take some time to think about what you choose to believe and exactly why you choose to believe it, because honestly, it just might be the most human thing you ever do.